Chapter 101 Arrival. It didn't take long to get all the trucks going again, and they were headed north as the sun disappeared behind the horizon. The drivers lit the lamps on the corners of their vehicles, as well as the headlights. It slowed them down, but after a whole day on the road, everyone was tired anyhow. The Royal Guard would drive all night, as they didn't trust anyone else to take over their trucks. But there weren't many extra people in the convoy to begin with. Hardly enough to make it look like they had a proper escort. Dominic slept for a few hours in the forge carriage, which was mostly loaded with supplies. If he had to actually work, it would be useless as a forge until it was unloaded. But presumably they were only going to use it when they got to the city. At most, they would likely keep it as a backup. Just after midnight, movement in the sky caught Dominic's attention, and he pointed the airship out to Wilkes, who shook his head. "It's heading north. It has to be one of ours. If there was a bit more moon out, we could likely identify it. But for now, just make a note, and we don't take action. We don't want to draw attention to our own airships, after all," he replied. Nothing moved near them as the trucks rattled down the gravel roads all night and pulled up to the city walls of Burton just before dawn. The city gates were locked tight, as expected at this time of day. But when they pulled up, the guards opened them after a short conversation with the garrison commander, who was in the front carriage with Princess Alexis. The city was not much of a city, by Dominic's estimation. It was a collection of fortified towers, gathered around a central keep. Small houses and shops filled every available meter of space, and even the roads through town were on elevated wooden platforms, passing over the roofs of the smaller buildings. "Well, this is different," Dominic muttered, while Wilkes laughed at him. "At least there is no mud on the road." The guard laughed as they moved slowly down the elevated platform. The wooden road? Above wooden and clay-shake roofs? In a city that might be about to face siege weapons. Dominic noted. "When you put it that way, it does sound like a bit of a fire hazard." Wilkes agreed. They were both mentally mapping the city, thinking of defensive plans for the situation that they had. It was not a great city to defend, with all the wooden structures. But it had a strong stone outer wall, so as long as the city wasn't on fire, it wasn't hopeless. The convoy went straight to the keep, where the roadways and buildings became all stone and steel, which was a bit more secure feeling than the wooden roadways of the outer areas. "Send up the advisor," someone shouted from the front of the convoy. Dominic hopped down from the front bench of the truck and jogged up to where a group of nobles had gathered. They all gave him matching skeptical looks, with his black robes, polished armor, and the apprentice trade skill core hung on the chain around his neck. Dominic had removed his hat when he changed into more formal clothes as they approached the city, but he was used to the dismissive looks he got. "Advisor Dominic, meet the Marquis of Burton and his sons." "Marquis, if you have an urgent need to contact me, you may contact the advisor directly. There is no need to pass messages through staff. I have conferred with your garrison commander, and we have formulated a defensive plan should the city be targeted." "Has the Natural Sons Regiment arrived yet?" Princess Alexis asked. "Your Highness, it's an honor to have your assistance in these trying times. My younger son Dax is a ranking member of the Natural Sons, and it has been quite the enlightening week having him home again." The tallest of the young men bowed politely, then turned to face Dominic. "Dominic Wavemates? Are you not the gunsmith who made the rifles for my regiment?" he asked. "One and the same. I have brought spare parts, should we need to repair any of the regiment's specialty rifles." Dominic agreed. The young man sighed in relief, and his father gave him a questioning look. "He's the Royal Forge's premier gunsmith, despite his youth. He made all 500 rifles for the Noble Sons Regiment personally. Nobody knows our rifles better than he does. With him here, we don't need to worry about running out of spare gear," Dax explained. That was a relief to the other soldiers, but the Marquis still didn't seem to understand anything about it. "Ah, yes. I heard that your rookie unit had some fancy gear. It was so good of the king to equip the surplus children so well," he declared after a few seconds of thought. The guards with him, and his oldest son, looked almost stunned by his dismissive attitude. Most parents had a favorite child, but wasn't that going too far? But Dominic was sure that would change the moment that a whole regiment of riflemen got to work. "Princess, if it pleases you, We have prepared rooms for you to freshen up and sleep before the afternoon's strategy meetings. Marquis Burton offered with a grand gesture that pulled his undersized shirt free of his pants. He wasn't a particularly paunchy man, but his clothes were all a bit too tight, and something about that bothered Dominic. The man was wealthy enough that he should be able to afford perfectly tailored clothing. But as he began to walk, he seemed to deflate. His clothes were loose again, which confused Dominic. He would have to ask about it as soon as they got inside because nobody else was mentioning it. Dominic moved to Princess Alexis' left side as they walked, while Colonel Wilkes took the right with his visor down. Again, he was a faceless royal guard, identical to his team. He didn't even wear a badge that showed his rank was different to the others. Chapter 102. Private Tower. As they walked, nobody spoke, other than Marquis Burton, extolling the virtues of his city. The new elevated tramways are a marvel of engineering. They have cut the time to traverse the city by 2/3, and now even the commoners can live in any part of the city and still easily and quickly make it to their chosen employer. It has done wonders for property values and quelled all the dissent about renovating the slums into properly high-density housing. The Marquis insisted. They certainly have done wonders. This might be the most completely renovated city in the entirety of Signia. Princess Alexis commended. The Marquis beamed with pride and gestured toward a large open area on the south side of the keep. We even introduced a landing area for airships. We get a twice-weekly service from here to Skippington and Hertbury. Mostly tourism, you understand. But the new airships do a wonderful job of carrying the mail as well. He explained. That would be a useful resource for the defenders if they could get a military airship or two here for the effort. Not many cities had a proper landing area, so close to the center of everything. Even the airship yards in the capital were on the edge of the city, built on platforms over the docks in the bay. The logic at the time had been that while they were flying ships, they were still ships. So, they should naturally belong with the other ships. Princess Alexis wasn't sold on that idea, but now that they were built, it didn't make sense to move them. Where are the barracks, Marquis? Princess Alexis asked, her blue eyes sharp as she scanned the cityscape from their elevated position. In the keep. With the tramways, it was deemed most efficient to put them in the center of the city, where they could get to any trouble spot in an equal amount of time. That made sense from a law enforcement standpoint, but it put all the guards well away from the city walls if there was an attack. That meant longer response times to the greatest of threats, in exchange for faster response to the more common domestic issues. Normally, that would be the optimal choice, but today, it meant that the princess or the garrison commander would have to work out a whole new deployment strategy for the forces in the city so that they were ready to defend the moment that enemy soldiers were spotted. They entered the keep itself, and Dominic saw that the staff was preparing to lead them to multiple different locations. It was a ready stance and organized formation that he had seen every day since he entered the palace. Staff waiting to escort different people stood apart so that it was clear who you should follow. But today, that could become an issue, as the princess would not want to be separated from her royal guard. A young woman with blonde hair almost as short as Dominic's stepped beside him. "Sir, if you would please follow me to your quarters." She spoke softly. Dominic looked to the princess, who nodded for him to follow. The maid led Dominic up multiple flights of stairs, down an excessively long corridor, and up a spiral staircase in a tower. "We are no longer in the main keep, are we?" he asked, not recalling there being a round tower in the design.
"No, sir."
"The Marquis has asked that you be housed in the North Tower, as it overlooks the walls of the city." Dominic nodded. "Are the others nearby?" The maid shook her head. "The princess is in the royal visitors' suites in the residential wing of the main keep, and her royal guard is in the suites surrounding hers, as per royal protocol." It didn't take a genius to realize that they were getting rid of him, putting him in a tower 100 meters from the keep itself. Even if someone needed to get in contact with him, it would take time for a messenger to get to him, and he would have the long walk back and forth for every event during their stay. The little things designed to let him know that he wasn't welcome, Dominic assumed. "Your journey has been long. If you would like to bathe and rest now, we will have the midday meal brought to your room." The maid informed him, looking vaguely uncomfortable. It might have been because the windows were open, but the temperature in the room was pleasant enough, so Dominic assumed it had to be something else. And that couldn't be good. A shower and a nap would both be wonderful. Thank you. As Dominic finished speaking, the maid rushed into the attached room with a slightly relieved sigh and got to work. He could hear the crackling of a freshly lit fire and the burble of a mechanical pump starting. Then the hum of the machinery as the pump primed and the water pressure rose. The tower is so far from anything that it's not connected to the keep's water supply, is it? Dominic asked from the bedroom.
No, sir.
The tower has piping to the aquifer under the city, but it mostly relies on its own storage tanks from rain runoff. She replied. That made sense, assuming that the tower was part of the keep's original fortifications, built before there was a fully walled city around it. After a few minutes, the maid came out and helped Dominic out of his coat, blushing nervously, then began unbuttoning his shirt. It was at that point that Dominic realized his concerns about spies, traitors, and nobles who took joy in subtly snubbing non-humans were not part of the reason that the maid was acting strangely. No, the entire reason that she was so nervous was because it was her job to assist him in bathing. But now he was in a bit of a situation. Lady Camilla, his tutor in courtly manners, had covered this during their lessons, but Dominic had never thought about it applying to himself personally. Now that it did, he wasn't sure which of them was more embarrassed. Chapter 103. Not in the reading material. Dominic managed to keep himself together until he was in the shower and the maid stepped to the corner of the room. It would be convenient if he had one of those communication items that the royal guards had so that he could ask someone with experience some questions about etiquette. Dominic was fairly sure that this was an attempt to distract him while he was kept out of the way, but from all that he remembered of Signia's protocols, it appeared that this was the expected treatment for a royal advisor. But the more that he thought about it, the more he felt like he was missing something. However, he hadn't managed to grasp what it was by the time that he finished washing and shut off the water. The maid wrapped a large towel around him and then placed a terry cloth robe over his shoulders. Thank you. How long do we have until the meal? So, I have time to prepare, he asked. The meal will be brought in 4 hours, advisor. Was there anything else that you needed before your rest? Dominic shook his head. No, I am good for now. The maid curtsied and stepped out of the room, but Dominic could hear that she only went to the other room on this level and not down the stairs. Sleep came as soon as Dominic's head hit the pillow, and it felt like he had only blinked when the gentle creak of the door opening woke him. The maid had returned, this time with a cart containing a covered platter. Oh, you are awake. Your lunch is ready, advisor. She greeted him with a soft smile. She placed the tray on the table and then stepped outside, where Dominic could hear her preparing a drink of some sort. Out of caution, Dominic cast Quality Kibble, the food and drink purification spell, over the whole floor. If any of the food or the water in the storage tank was tampered with, it should be fine now. Once she placed the coffee down, the maid picked up a set of small spoons and took one bite of each dish on the tray, then a spoonful of coffee. Her nervous expression told Dominic that she also wasn't 100% sure that nobody was going to try to poison him, but she did her job and hoped for the best. So, Dominic began to relax around her and ate his lunch. Soon enough, the others would be up and it would be time to work. But Dominic was reasonably certain that the Marquis wouldn't schedule anything for less than 8 hours after their arrival. More likely, he wouldn't want to schedule anything until tomorrow, just in case it conflicted with the princess's schedule for the day. Once he was finished and the dishes were cleared, Dominic started working on the lesson plans that he had brought with him. There was much more to study about magical engineering, and he could do the theory work any time, unlike working on his smithy skills, which needed space and tools. He did have his travel forge and tools in his storage item, but hammering away in the forge would make it impossible to hear anything happening around the tower. Dominic was nearly through the lesson plan on combining effect circuits within a single-element Magitech orb when he noticed that the maid was beginning to look flushed. "Miss, are you all right?"
You don't look well,
he asked. The maid just nodded weakly and remained standing in the corner of the room, waiting for orders. "No, seriously, you're bright red in the face and sweating. At least sit down or something," he insisted. The maid blinked slowly, then sprinted out of the room and came back with a vial of something bright blue. Advisor, please, you need to take the antidote now. She pleaded. You should likely take that first. I feel fine. The maid shook her head. Dragonberries aren't fatal, I will be fine. But they're a powerful sedative. Dominic frowned. Dragonberries weren't a sedative. In fact, his mother grew them in the garden to make pies with. Dragonberries? You must be delirious. Dominic insisted, and got up to help the unfortunate servant. But shouldn't his spell have purified his food? He cast it over the full floor, and everything was already present when he did. However, as he stood up, Dominic recalled something his mother had said when he was small. The Wavemaid's family used dragonberry tea to sort out imposters and spies. Because it was toxic to humans, but not to them. It would cause them to burn up, causing an intense fever, then they would pass out for days at a time. By the time that they could wake up, they would have been safely handled by the manor's guards. Dominic popped the cork off the bottle and fed a bit of it to the maid. You didn't need much. The full vial would be enough for the whole guard entourage if they mixed it with water. Instantly, her flushed face began to clear, and the maid began to panic. Advisor, you must take the antidote. She pleaded. Dominic patted her on the head and smiled. I am a Wavemaid's dragonkin. We eat dragonberries in pie. Now, grab the coffee and bring me to the princess quarters. I believe that the Marquis has a traitor in their kitchen. She nodded in agreement and grabbed the carafe of coffee, then twisted the lid closed. This way, advisor. I know a shorter way to get to the princess. She took off running, with Dominic right behind her. Then, he nearly had a heart attack when the maid turned the corner at the bottom of the spiral staircase and simply jumped out the window. There was a flat stone roof, less than a meter away, and she had paused to make sure that she hadn't lost him. But after his moment of panic that she had just jumped to her death, Dominic was behind her again, running across the building, then a portion of the keep wall, and finally jumping onto Princess Alexis' balcony. For the record, this is a horribly insecure room. Dominic panted, catching his breath. The maid nodded, then took out a key to unlock the patio door. And that was when the real chaos started. Chapter 104. Dragonberry Nap. Princess Alexis was on the ground, unconscious. Two servants were dead on the floor, decapitated by her guard, while one was sobbing in the corner with her hands on her head. There was shouting in the corridors, but Dominic couldn't tell what it was as he cast mage armor to block the first strike of the royal guards. It's me. There were dragonberries in my food. What were her symptoms? He demanded. High fever, then unconsciousness. The room is soundproofed, and we didn't notice until the guards inside failed to check in. The guard reported, with his blade still on Dominic's neck. Where are the other guards? They all ate lunch. That explained it. Only the ones on guard duty at the door didn't eat at the same time, for security's sake. So, half the team was out of action. But not for much longer. I need your canteen, Dominic insisted, just now realizing that the coffee could well have been the drugged part of the meal. It wouldn't do to feed that to anyone else. The guard took out his canteen, and Dominic dumped the remainder of the antidote into it, then gave it a shake. Feed that to the princess, and then the guards. The guard gave him what Dominic took as a flat glare, though it was impossible to tell with his visor down. Right, I will get her to drink. You have work to do. Dominic tipped the princess upright and fed her a mouthful of water that she instinctively swallowed. Then another. After the third, the flush began to fade from her face, and her eyelids fluttered. Good afternoon, princess. I will leave you to the care of your guards, while I go treat the others. He whispered. Princess Alexis nodded and gave him a faint smile, though her eyes remained mostly shut. The guard tapped the door, and it was open from outside, where Dominic saw that the other 6 guards were already all active. Oh, you found the antidote. Good work. Guard Colonel Wilkes chuckled behind his visor. We carry a magical antidote with us. Fortunately, one of our number was in the privy when the food came, so he didn't eat with the rest of the unit. So they were waiting to see who showed up. Dominic nodded and closed the door, returning to the princess room. Here, sip at that. I diluted the antidote in it. Alexis smiled at him. Thank you. Quick thinking, coming here to check on us in that condition. Dominic chuckled. I rather like the flavor of dragonberries, actually. It was the maid assigned to my room who got us here so fast. I'm over in the tower. The guard snorted in amusement, and the princess giggled softly. What? The princess patted him on the shoulder. Advisors are put over in the tower, because most of them are lecherous old bastards, and the royal family prefers not to have them right next door terrorizing our servants. The maid who had been assigned to Dominic's floor nodded in agreement, but didn't say anything until the princess addressed her directly. If my guess is right, you should be a courtesan from the Marquis-favored establishment in town, right?
She asked.
The maid shook her head. The Marquis isn't the sort. He seems satisfied with his wife. I was chosen on recommendation from the Marquis 3 years ago for assignments of this nature. The princess gave Dominic a knowing look, and he rolled his eyes at her. Do I strike you as the type that would do that to someone who is afraid of losing their job if they said no? That made both the maid and the princess laugh. They wouldn't assign you one who wasn't willing. But I applaud your moral convictions in this degenerate world. Since you're here, you should wait to see what happens. I don't know whether they're going to send someone to the tower or my suites first, but I am willing to wager that it's directly here. They put so much sedative in the food that I only got a few bites in. Alexis informed him. Then, she gestured for Dominic's assigned maid to sit on a chair at the side of the room, so that she could ask questions. How did you know what antidote to use, and where did you get it from? She asked. The maid shrugged. The tower is fully stocked. There are 2 vials of every common antidote in the servants' quarters, as well as a magical universal cleansing potion. I don't think that whoever sent the food up knew that, so they can't be one of the regular chefs. Princess Alexis gestured at the guard, and Dominic realized that it was some sort of sign language, but not the one that he knew. City guards and soldiers had a set of hand signals, a basic silent language, that he had learned as a youth while watching them train. But this wasn't the same. It was still done with one hand, but it was more detailed. But it also wasn't the same one that the Wavemates guards used when Dominic was a child. A quick tap at the door let them know that something was happening, and then Dominic heard the door across the hall close. Everyone in position. The guard whispered. Alexis motioned out the patio door, and Dominic dragged the 2 surviving maids outside, then cast minor illusion on the guard to make him look like a chest of drawers. Alexis laughed quietly, then Dominic cast the spell again, making her look flushed and sweaty, with a bit of blood from her temple onto her clothes, as if she had hit her head when she collapsed. Neither would stand up to more than a few seconds of scrutiny, but with the princess pretending to be unconscious on the floor and signs of a bloody struggle in the room, it was likely that whoever came wouldn't hesitate. The door silently swung open just enough to let a slender figure through, and the assassin went straight for Alexis, not noticing the guard standing behind him. A swift strike to the back of his neck knocked the man out cold, and Princess Alexis climbed to her feet. She gestured for silence, and the guard carefully checked the hallway to see if there was a spotter. All clear, he reported. Excellent. Now let's go sort this mess out. Advisor Dominic, please bring the staff with you. There will be questions. I don't suppose that you know a truth spell, do you? Alexis ordered. Dominic shook his head. I do not. But I have a ball-peen smithy hammer I can loan you if you need to persuade someone to speak truthfully. Chapter 105. Missing Delivery. Dominic motioned for the 2 maids to follow him, and then looked down at the bodies on the floor. Technically, they were staff as well. So he stuffed them in his storage cube. The royal guard led them through the keep, down to the 2nd level, where confused staff scattered as they marched through with their blades drawn. Dominic could see that some were following them for a moment, wondering just who the princess and her guards were going after with such determination, but none dared to go as far as openly following them to their destination. That was probably best for their health. Royal Guard Colonel Wilkes turned right and kicked a solid oaken door, breaking the latch and swinging it open to reveal a very shocked Marquis poring over paperwork in an otherwise empty office. Princess, what happened? He asked, more shocked at the intrusion than angered or anything else. Where are your dungeons? We've got a failed assassin with us, and we will need to speak to your kitchen staff. All of our meals were drugged, and this man attempted the assassination when he thought I should be unconscious. She explained. The Marquis nodded. and motioned to his right. Down the hall, turn left. That stairwell leads into the basement levels. Should I accompany you, or should I have the guards gather the kitchen staff first? Take my advisor and gather everyone who was in the kitchen or handling food today. Princess Alexis decided, then had her guards drag the unconscious assassin out of the room, leaving Dominic and the two maids behind. Are these two suspects? Marquis Burton asked. Dominic shook his head. No, they're the two most likely to not be suspects from among the staff. First, we need to know who delivered the food to both the princess and the tower. But don't let anyone from the kitchens leave yet. The Marquis entered the kitchen and spoke quietly to the head chef, then nodded and stepped into the hall. I believe that we have a manhunt ahead of us. Neither of the delivery boys returned to the kitchens afterward. I will send the guards to find them now. What else do you need right now? He asked. I will speak to the head chef before we do anything. There is a chance the food was drugged after it left the kitchen. The drug that they used was a poor choice, and an experienced chef should have known that. Dominic answered quietly. Marquis Burton nodded, and Dominic stepped back into the kitchen. Chef, do you have a moment? Dominic asked the aging woman in a white coat. Royal sorcerer, what can we help you with today? She asked, still clearly flustered by the Marquis' question earlier. Today has been a bit stressful, and I was wondering if you could make a bit of comfort food for me for my home. A dragonberry pie. The chef burst out laughing, then covered her mouth and shook her head. Those don't grow within 500 kilometers of here, and they're illegal to sell insignia in the first place. You must be from the far west somewhere. She replied. Her genuine confusion and amusement told Dominic what he had wanted to know. She wasn't aware of what poison was used on him and the princess. Dominic sighed dramatically. Such a shame. Done right, they're the perfect combination of sweet and tart. But if you do happen to come across some, let me know. I'll make it worth your time. But for now, I must assist the Marquis. It appears that our missing delivery boys are in some real trouble, and the longer we have to search, the less lenient the princess is feeling. Dominic could already hear the running outside, the distinctive clanking run of armored guards searching for someone. And so could everyone else in the kitchen. Did they mess up badly? One of the kitchen workers asked. Dominic nodded. Pretty badly. However, if the guards have to drag them in kicking and screaming, it's going to get much worse for them. The cook lowered her voice. What did they do? Dominic lowered his voice, as if he were telling her a great secret. They swapped the food deliveries. I had a rather odd lunch request, and the princess suspects that they might have been trying to poison her. The cook looked horrified and motioned for one of the others to come over. She explained the situation, and the man nodded. Follow me. I believe I know where they might have gone to hide. Dominic followed him out of the room, leaving the others behind in the halls outside the kitchen, telling just enough of the truth to get everyone concerned, but phrasing it as an accident worked much better than hurling potentially fatal accusations around. They went down a narrow stairwell, down a dark hallway barely lit with Magitech lights, and then to what looked like a common room, which was completely dark, with the light bulb orbs inactive. Dominic sent a bit of mana to the lights, and the room lit up, revealing destruction. The sofa was overturned, there was blood all over the cushions, and two bodies lay on the ground. Go get the guard. And maybe a doctor. Dominic ordered. What was he supposed to do in this situation? Make notes? That seemed like the most obvious choice. He just had to make sure that he didn't get too close and make a mess of the blood. But there were some obvious answers. First, one of the boys was holding a coin purse, much more stuffed than Dominic would expect for a minimum wage employee. Second, there were coins on the floor under the low table, which had been split in half. Dago's gold coins. That almost felt like a setup, as if they were being framed for the crime. Anyone in their economic position would immediately put those coins somewhere safe, and not keep them in their hand or anywhere where they risk losing them. Then, the fact that the coins were left behind out in the open after the fight. If they were set up and killed by someone else from the staff, they would have taken the gold before they fled. So, it was most likely their mysterious assassin who set them up. Hopefully, the princess and her men were having some luck getting answers. Chapter 106. Find them alive. Dominic began to draw out the scene in his notepad, then wrote notes on everything that he saw and everything that he thought might be suspicious. It didn't take long, but by the time that he was done, there was a member of the royal guard as well as the local physician coming down the hallway. "Why is it so dark down here?" the guard complained. "We use minimal mana settings in the servant areas to save energy. Would you like for me to call someone to brighten the lights?" Dominic heard an unfamiliar voice respond.
Don't worry about it.
"Dominic, I need light," the guard called. Dominic smiled and flooded the lights all along the hall with mana, bringing the brightness in the hall to a level that was nearly as good as a sunny day outdoors. And that made all the difference. There is blood on the wall. Someone was injured when they left here. The handprints lead away. And they have been skimping on the cleaning since nobody can see anything down here. The layers of dust and the cracks hold blood very well. But that's a good thing. I can use that to help track down the culprit," he declared. "Find the culprit? How would a dirty hallway help?" the unfamiliar voice asked. "You'll see shortly." "Dominic, what did you find?" "Two dead." They put up a struggle, but it looks like a setup. One is holding a bag full of gold, and there are more Dago's gold coins on the floor between the bodies. One has been stabbed in the back, but it shouldn't have been by the other body. There are no footprints in the blood around the corpse, so he either died first, or he wasn't near the one stabbed from behind. I didn't get close enough to check them for skin or blood under the nails, as I didn't want to disturb anything before the experts got here. I also don't know if they are alive, and I don't have any medical skills if they are. That got the doctor moving, but he instantly shook his head when he touched them. They're both slightly below normal temperature. Dead at least an hour, likely closer to 3. The doctor determined. Then they were dead before the food was delivered. Even an hour dead would make it very unlikely they actually delivered the food. Dominic noted. The doctor frowned and took out a thermometer. 6 degrees below normal. Given the temperature of the servant quarters, I would say over 2 hours dead. Dominic touched the floor. Blood is still sticky, not dry. 2 hours dead. The blood should be dry in all but the deeper spots. He added it to his notes, for someone who knew more about crime scenes. But the guard was already moving back down the hall and holding up a Magitech orb to a bloody handprint on the wall. It glowed on one side, and the guard nodded. The perpetrator is not the one that we caught. They're on an upper level of the keep right now, not in the dungeon. Mr. Burton, would you like to accompany us, or will you see to the murder scene? The guard asked. I will take care of the scene here. You can take the advisor with you if you need. The guard nodded. Advisor, please accompany me. If the suspect resists, do your best to restrain them with non-lethal means. Dominic smiled. I have just the spell for that. The man who the royal guard had identified as Mr. Burton, meaning he was a son of the Marquis, gave Dominic a curious look. And what sort of spell might you have for non-lethal apprehension of criminals? Dominic smiled sweetly at him. Chain lightning, of course. Just drop the output a bit, and it will put anyone on the ground with minimal lingering damage. The young nobleman frowned. Can you verify that? You want me to shock someone? To Dominic's surprise, he nodded in agreement and gestured to one of the keep guards, who gave him an incredulous look. Dominic turned to the royal guard for confirmation, unsure how to handle this situation. Go ahead. He will get danger pay and a combat injury bonus for the day if you do. The guard still didn't look happy, but Dominic hit him with chain lightning at 1/3 output anyhow. The man howled in pain as his muscles spasmed, then he fell to the ground twitching. See, he's down, and he's not dead. The royal guard snorted in amusement. But you might be if he catches you alone. That looked like it hurt. The doctor cursed as the man's armor shocked him when he attempted to remove it. But other than a slight burn mark on his stomach, there was no obvious damage, and the guard got to his feet within 30 seconds. Point proven. I will be sure to put the bonus on the payroll. The city guard glared at the nobleman and grumbled. Better be a good bonus. I still can't feel my tender bits. If this stops me from having children, I am coming back for compensation. Dominic motioned for the royal guard to lead the way. Once that man started to recover feeling, he was going to be even less pleased with the situation than he was now. Dominic had shocked himself more than once while working on damaged Magitech items, and the tingling and cramping of muscles afterward were much worse than the numbness. Using the Magitech orb he had attuned to the blood on the wall as a guide, the royal guard jogged through the hallways, with Dominic chasing after him. It was impossible to tell if he knew where he was going, but the orb was leading them in a general direction, and they were reaching the edge of the keep. They were also on the 6th floor, and the target was still above them. The guard motioned for silence as they reached a door at the end of a staircase, and Dominic prepared himself for a fight. The door swung open, and Dominic found himself standing at the edge of the airship platform, having entered from the service stairwell. The very crowded airship platform, which was preparing to receive an incoming pair of transports at the same time.
Damn it.
Try not to make it too obvious what we're after. It will be difficult to track down the right person in this crowd, but they're not going anywhere. I can use the royal prerogative to prevent the ships from leaving. The guard whispered. Chapter 107. Hide and Seek. Dominic followed the guard through the crowd, headed straight for the far side of the platform. They were following the direction on the Magitech orb, and hopefully that would be exact enough that they would know who it was by the moment when the directional arrow turned. As they neared the edge of the platform, Dominic began to worry that they had missed their destination. But then, the glowing spot suddenly moved to the right, pointing at open air. Dominic cast a reduced power version of chain lightning in the general direction of the glow, and agonized screams filled the platform. A man in workman's coveralls appeared from the empty space as he twitched and flailed for a moment, then tumbled backward off the platform. Damn it, the guard muttered, then stepped to the edge to see where the man had landed. Dominic looked over the edge and frowned. It was 7 stories down to the cobblestone driveway of the keep, where a horrified groom was looking at the body which had just landed next to the horse he was brushing down. I am blaming you for this one, the guard noted dryly. I am telling the princess it was a suicide. Dominic agreed. How was he supposed to know that the invisible target was standing right at the edge of the platform? With all the noise, only a few had noticed the commotion, but the presence of the royal guard said that someone with authority had already arrived, and they could ignore the issue until their work was done. Or longer if it involved paperwork. Dominic followed his escort down to the entry of the keep, where panicked guards were milling around, wondering what was going on. They had been called for the man who fell off the platform, but nobody was sure how it had happened or who this man was. He was in uniform, but none of the staff present recognized him. Have there been many new hires recently? Dominic asked the groom, who looked like he couldn't decide whether to cry or vomit. The man shook his head, then stared at the soft brush in his hand. The Marquis hasn't hired anyone new in 6 months. He said it was to help build teamwork so that all the new people started at the same time every year. It left a few areas short-handed when people quit, but we should know almost everyone by now. Especially our group, you know? We work at the front gate, and the guards check ID when workers who live outside the keep come in for work in the morning. Dominic turned to the gate guard, who was staring at the man's body in confusion. As the groom had said, he had no idea who this man was, but he should have seen him every day for the last 6 months. Boots marching to the gate marked the arrival of more troops, and Dominic saw Dax, the younger son of Marquis Burton, leading a team from the Natural Sons Regiment to their location. Advisor, Princess Alexis has instructed us to assist you in the apprehension of the fugitive. Dax announced. Well, he's not going far. He fell off the airship platform when we were chasing him. Dominic explained. Dax nudged the body with his boot and frowned. Well, that's not quite what she was hoping for. But apprehended is apprehended, I suppose. The man from earlier has begun to talk, and he identified his companions. Then Dax paused and crouched down to wipe blood from the man's face. Well, shit. I know who this is. That is the Viscount of Boscombe's nephew. We went to school together. He's a Dago's noble. Or he was until a few minutes ago. Dax explained. Dominic didn't know where the Boscombe family's holdings were, so they probably weren't a border holding. But that did confirm that these were foreign spies. I should inform the princess of our findings. Dominic sighed. Dax shook his head. It's better that I do it. You're of a tender age to be seeing what is going on in the dungeons. Dominic resisted the urge to point out that both Dax and the princess were at most only a few years older than he was. He already knew that everyone underestimated his age. Dominic's mind briefly wandered back to that day Dagos attacked Wavemates and the raid on Westover Township. He had been out in the forest, gathering herbs and root vegetables for his mother when the attack began, and he didn't even hear the battle until he was nearly home. By then, the Dagos army had already sacked the village, and his extended family, even the small children, had been executed on the front steps of the manor house. He had rushed home, hoping to warn his parents, only to find a raiding party burning his house. After that, things got blurry, and the next clear memory was kneeling in the center of town, surrounded by dead soldiers. But what he did remember in between, he didn't care to reminisce about, so Dominic focused back on the present, where he had again taken the life of an invader from Dagos. But he found that he simply couldn't feel bad for the dead man. All right, the show's over, folks. Let's get this cleaned up. The princess will want the physician to examine the body. However, it doesn't need to be here in the entry. We already know how he died. The royal guard insisted. The staff began moving, getting as far as possible from the scene before they were nominated to clean up, and the royal guard leaned over to whisper to Dominic. Next time, just shoot them or something. It's less likely to be fatal than trying not to kill them. Dominic did his best not to laugh. Well, I've got a mana revolver with me. I can probably make that happen, he replied. A man from the horse stables came over with a wheelbarrow and loaded the body, then moved it off to a storage room out of sight of the entrance. That gave the cleaners a chance to come out and douse the area with buckets of water, washing the blood down into the gutters. Good enough to start using the area again. Chapter 108. Weapons Training. Dominic, good work finding the other spy. Shame that they couldn't be interrogated. But I have another task for you today. Princess Alexis announced the moment that she came out the front gates of the keep. At your service, Princess. Alexis winked at Dominic and motioned toward Dax, who had returned with her. I want you to work with the Natural Sons Regiment today. They have been training with your rifles for some time, but nobody knows the design and its quirks better than you do. Work with them to optimize their firing rates and anything else that they might need assistance to perfect. The regiment is quite recently formed, as the Marquis was quick to point out, and some time with a royal advisor would benefit them immensely. She instructed. Of course, Your Highness. Lord Dax, please lead the way to the training grounds, and we can begin. I do know a few things about your equipment that might not have been made public. Dominic agreed. Dax led him off to the far side of the keep, then over the wall, to where a large training ground had been constructed on the roof of a warehouse. This city was nothing if not space-efficient. The Natural Sons Regiment was already gathered when they arrived, and they greeted Dominic with a smart salute as he walked onto the training grounds. Master Gunsmith, welcome. They chanted in unison. Greetings, Regiment. It's a pleasure to meet you all. I have heard great things about your capabilities. However, the royal family believes that there are still a few tips and tricks that I can share. Should we get started? Dominic replied. Of course, Master Gunsmith. What did you want to start with? I need a volunteer to see how you're doing things. First, empty your rifle, then show me your reloading process. Dominic instructed. The soldiers shrugged. This was a simple thing they had been over 1,000 times during basic training. Dax gestured to one of the soldiers, and the man dumped out the rounds from his rifle into a pouch. Then he moved the rifle to a ready position as if he had just finished firing. He dropped the butt of the rifle on his boot, holding the forward guard, and popped the cap off the lower tube, then grabbed a handful of slugs and poured them into the feeder tube. He placed the spring-loaded cap back on the tube and worked the side lever to prime the air canister, and then the trigger guard lever to chamber round. Then he placed it back to his shoulder, and Dax nodded in acknowledgement. Excellent. There isn't much that will shave time off that except preparing loads in advance. Dominic agreed. In advance? Dax asked. Dominic nodded. The shot is round before it's pressed in the action. So you can roll them in a paper tube and just rip the end off to pour them in. That's why the cap section is flared. But if you're feeling spicy, you can hang the munitions bag from your wrist as a counterbalance and load them in the action one at a time. It saves time if you need one more shot and don't have time for full reload. Dominic took a spare rifle from his storage cube and a bag of ammunition. Then he lifted the rifle and worked the lever with his right hand while tossing the ball in the open action with his left. The soldiers stared at him in confusion. Ours don't work like that. It's blocked, see? Dominic frowned, then reached over and pulled the pin holding the dust cover, allowing it to swing open. I know that techno-magic is best not tampered with, but it looks like someone forgot to mention the little details, like what was just to keep the rifles clean during transport and what was a functional bit. Actually, Dominic had forgotten to tell anyone, so they all just assumed that it was supposed to be that way and didn't mess with it because the rifle worked, and that was the important part. The soldiers nodded in understanding. The dust covers could mostly stay in place, as they would keep the rifle from getting gummed up in battle. But if you were expecting a hard-pressed battle, it would save you in an emergency if you had it off. I left explicit details on cleaning, so I'm sure you all got those notes. Other than that, I'm not sure what else we can go over, other than ammunition. Do any of you have the Create Munitions Magitech orb? Dominic asked. Most of the soldiers nodded. If you socket it in the rifle, just work the action, and it should activate with the shaping press as the target by default. No need to manually reload. I included the charging circuit, as it's the same as the one to enchant the munitions with a spell effect. Dominic explained. They all began to swap enchantments around. If they didn't ever run out of ammunition, they would gladly take the loss of additional damage during most fights. They were expecting soldiers, not powerful magical beasts, and that meant Magitech armor. But with repeated hits, that would inevitably fail. So it was better to get more shots going out and save yourself the time of creating the rounds in your munitions pouch and then loading the rifle. One more thing that I discovered after the rifles were shipped out. You can mark ranges on the rear slide sight once you have tested the individual rifles. They'll all be slightly different, just because the workmanship isn't precise enough to calibrate them in advance. But that will save you precious seconds when picking targets. Dax laughed and showed Dominic the rear sight of his rifle that already had a set of marks scratched into it. Well, I guess that one was more obvious than expected. You are the professionals. After that, all the soldiers began coming up with questions about maintenance, what to do if the compressed air began to leak, issues that could come from damage to the various parts of the rifle, and other questions that nobody but the original gunsmith could answer. Chapter 109. Natural Sons Training. The Natural Sons Regiment demonstrated their skills for Dominic, shooting at targets at the end of the training field. While that wasn't a long distance, it did give them a chance to show that they could accurately pick targets with minimal hesitation and that they weren't doing anything that might damage the Magitech rifles. They practiced for an hour before the garrison commander came out to inspect, along with 100 of his archers. Lord Sorcerer, the garrison has training scheduled. Might we have the field? He requested. Dominic saw Dax frown, and a number of the riflemen looked like they were about to speak up, but Dominic motioned for them to wait. Of course, Garrison Commander. I have seen what I need out of the regiment. Their accuracy and reload rate is not inferior to a trained archer, and the rifles have the advantage in armor penetration by a wide margin. Dominic agreed. The Natural Sons nodded in satisfaction. The new Magitech rifles certainly were superior to any bow that they had ever held. The Natural Sons moved to the edge of the training area, and the archers took their positions, ready to show up the riflemen. But Dominic didn't get a chance to enjoy the show, as the moment that he moved away from the training ground, a member of the Royal Guard came to call for him. Advisor, your expertise is needed for the airships. He explained. What Dominic was expected to be able to do with an airship was a mystery. That wasn't even close to his area of expertise, and he didn't have a spell that would refill them, should the envelope have sprung a leak. Nevertheless, Dominic left the units to their rivalry and followed the Royal Guard to the platform the spy had fallen from earlier. They were greeted by a group of techno-wizards and a small team of airship crew, who were in the middle of a heated debate that was paused when Dominic arrived. Wonderful. Royal Advisor, we require your input. We are retrofitting these airships for combat use, and we have come to an impasse. One of the techno-wizards explained. All right, what seems to be the issue? The man flipped all 3 layers of his goggles up away from his eyes and straightened his collar before speaking. We have determined that 16 cannons per side, 32 in total, are the necessary firepower allotment for a vessel this size. However, The staff says that it is simply infeasible. We have already created the lightweight cannons, and I simply cannot get through to him. The techno-wizard explained. Dominic turned to the crewmen and motioned for them to speak their part. 16 cannons is 3,200 kilos. 32 crewmen with kit and supplies is another 3,200 kilos. Plus the pilot and navigator. The ship's max cargo load is 7,000 kilos. What in the ever-loving hell are we supposed to load them with? That's 2 volleys and we're out of munitions. And that's with only half the cannons and manpower they insist upon. Dominic looked at the airships and wondered where they were planning to put 16 cannons per side in the first place. They would be nearly shoulder to shoulder trying to operate them. Or were they going to set them up like a man-o-war battleship and cut a cannon deck out of the lower level as well? Dominic looked at the 2 ships and then at the designs on the table. Indeed, they had planned 2 decks worth of cannons, with every square meter of the airship dedicated to firepower. You have them designed as a heavy battleship, correct? I believe that the more effective use might actually be as a frigate. If you have the number of cannons, put them on the lower deck, and then arm all the crewmen with rifles, they will be prepared for not only naval battles, but boarding actions. Also, we have so many techno-wizards here. Surely we have someone who can build munitions creation orbs? Dominic suggested. Cannons that create their own munitions? Or a central charm on the cannon deck? One of the crewmen asked. Now that you mention it, self-loading cannons would have the number of crewmen who are needed to man them. Do we have the design team to make that happen? Dominic suggested. The techno-wizards all turned to each other and shrugged. We all know they create munitions spell, and in theory we could add it to an object to create fully formed cannonballs. It's a larger charge than they're designed for, but that's not a major change to the orb. But where are they supposed to get the mana from? I'm not sure if you are aware, advisor, but the average crewman doesn't have a large energy reserve. Dominic smiled. That's all right. You're here to help them. The ships would be fine with a techno-wizard on board to refill the stock of black powder and cannonballs. The spokesperson of the airship crews made a note on a pad in his hand, then nodded. That would give us more than enough weight to work with. 17 crew for the cannons, including the techno-wizard. We would have plenty of weight available for fuel and supplies for an extended mission. He agreed. The techno-wizards did not look impressed with that plan. Surely, you don't suggest that Royal Techno-Wizards should go to combat in an airship, advisor? One of the men asked. I don't see why a Techno-Wizard shouldn't go to war in a Royal Navy airship. You arrived here by one during wartime, did you not? Who better to keep their cannons and engines working at peak efficiency? Dominic asked. The Techno-Wizards shared terrified glances, and Dominic relented. It might be best if they did, but if they were too afraid to do their jobs, it wouldn't help anyone. Or we can stand here until we find a way to make the cannons reload themselves using a Magitech orb in a more efficient way. Then, you could remain here on the ground, and the crewmen could take turns building up the mana to reload them. Making a handful of pistol bullets was easy. Making a full 3-kilogram cannonball with an explosive core and a powder charge was much more difficult. Chapter 110. Self-Loading Cannons. That plan sounded much better to the techno-wizards, and within seconds, a half-dozen sheets of paper were on the table as they all frantically began drawing Magitech circuitry to upgrade the cannons to load themselves in a way that any crewman could manage. While they worked, Dominic stepped back and listened carefully, committing all the knowledge that he could to his memory as they argued about the functions and features they wanted to add to the cannons. You know that the crew will still struggle to activate that orb, and they'll be sent up with the airships anyhow, right? The Royal Guard asked Dominic quietly. Yes, but they haven't realized it yet. When the fighting starts, we will send a few of them up to ensure that everything is working properly, or to keep the ships working. Whatever excuse we need. For now, we just need a way to maximize firepower without overloading our ships. Dominic agreed. He could sense the guards' amusement by the shift of his position as they watched the experts work. They were doing all this to get out of having to go to battle, but ultimately, they were going to be conscripted to go with the airships anyhow. The major issue with the project was that they needed to make a Magitech orb that not only worked properly while not bonded to anyone, but to ensure that it didn't attune to the user on use, as that would make it impossible to change crewmen without changing orbs. The fact that they needed it to also make decent cannonballs without any extra levels put into the orb was a secondary concern. At least for right now. Even the clay to steel orb needed dozens of levels of upgrades before it was making high-quality steel. But Dominic knew that they didn't actually need hardened steel or extreme quality for this project. Just enough to punch through wooden planks and an explosive core, as that would make them more effective against airships, which wouldn't sink with a cannonball-sized hole at the waterline like a regular ship. The solution that they came up with was to make the cannonball of stone, which was apparently easier to create. Then the hollow ball would be filled with explosives, and whoever activated it could set the thickness of the plug, which set the detonation timer. Dominic copied everything that they were writing on the plans as they argued about exactly what design was going to be best for the cannons. There was one other design that he wanted to make. Grape shot. If they were flying overhead with an airship, then firing thousands of small stones at the ground would be excellent at persuading invaders to simply go away. The damage might be minimal against magically armored targets, but it would be hell on equipment and vehicles. I still don't think that an 8-cannon volley will be sufficient to take out one of the Dago's airships. One of the techno-wizards insisted. Dominic tapped the plan on the table. If this works as planned, the cannoneers are going to be able to fire a round every 10 seconds instead of twice a minute. That is the rate that our soldiers have reported from previous battles with Dago's artillery. I see that we've got a rack and pinion aiming system for the cannons, so we can aim much faster than usual. That will help as well, but not needing the conventional loading process will save most of the time. He insisted. One of the airship crewmen cleared his throat. If you're going to try to fire that fast, how are we going to have time to swab the barrel and pull the cannon back into position? He asked. Just pull it into position. If the charge cooks off, it cooks off. It's all created at once, so there is no loader in front of the cannon. Dominic replied with a shrug. The crewman laughed. Spoken like a true sorcerer. Just let it blow up. But you've got a point. If we're using 3-kilo cannons, precision and timing aren't going to matter nearly as much. They'll punch through planking easily enough. But do you think that we could get one big one? You know, something with some range, so that we can terrify those Dago's bastards before they ever get in range for a broadside. One of the keep's armorers looked up from the techno-wizard's notes. What did you have in mind? A long barrel cannon, like the ones we've got on the roof? He asked, indicating the 3-meter barrels of the antique brass cannons. I was thinking like a huge rifle. Something that would hit like a cannon but actually have some accuracy over long distances. Dominic smiled. That sort of artillery sounded like a lot of fun. Sniping from a moving airship was highly unlikely, but if they could hit another airship from 5 or 6 kilometers away, it might well terrify the Dago's army away. The techno-wizard sighed. We'll start on that later. First, we need to get the main armament working. If we don't have enough weight available for all the cannons, or for all the crew to work the cannons, we need to do what we can to make them more efficient. Dominic understood the general idea. A 4-person team was considered minimal for efficient firing of the cannons. Unfortunately, the airship was already struggling with weight, which slowed them down and made it more difficult to gain altitude. 2 men per cannon for a broadside was bound to be slower than they would like. But the Dago's airships hadn't been fully modified for naval combat. They were mostly crew transports. We will have to work with what we have. If that means half as many cannons as you would prefer, and the crewmen equipped with rifles to repel boarders, that is what we will have to do. Just keep it up, and I will make sure that the princess approves everything. Dominic insisted. The royal guard chuckled. You're going to take that fall if this doesn't work? Dominic shrugged. It's probably not a capital offense, and I've been chewed out before. But I'm trusting them all to pull this off. The first time that we drop a Dago's military transport with a broadside fusillade, there will be plenty of credit to go around for everyone.